Nobody in that Atlanta town hall knew they were about to witness a moment that would shake the entire country. It began like any ordinary political event. Calm crowd, predictable questions, the kind of night that should have faded quietly into the news cycle. But all it took, one question, one smirk, and one line spoken on live television to turn a routine evening into a national flashpoint that would dominate headlines, divide opinions, and spark a silence so powerful it shifted the country. But sometimes the moments that change the national conversation never announce themselves. They slip in quietly. A single question, a slight shift in tone, one sentence spoken at the wrong time to the wrong person, and suddenly everything is different. The hall that evening was full. Students sat in the front rows, legs bouncing with nervous energy. Community leaders filled the middle seats, ready to clap at the right moments. Cameras lined the back, red recording lights glowing steadily like tiny watchful eyes. And somewhere in that room, tucked into the crowd, was a young woman who had rehearsed her question 3 times before stepping into the venue. She had no idea she was about to ignite something that would echo far beyond Atlanta. When her turn came, she approached the microphone with a quiet confidence. The room softened, waiting for her words. She introduced herself calmly, then asked about Michelle Obama's new initiative supporting young girls in low-income communities, a program focused on mentorship, education, and empowerment. It was a question rooted in substance, one that normally would have led to a respectful response, maybe even praise. But Donald Trump didn't nod thoughtfully. He didn't comment on the program's goals. He didn't talk about policy, impact, or leadership. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, smirked, and tilted his head in that unmistakable way that signaled he was drifting away from the script. "I always try to be so nice and respectful," he began, dragging out the words as if preparing the audience for something they might not be ready to hear. He paused, a long pause, letting anticipation fill the air. But she opened something, opened a little bit of a box. Oh, she was nasty. Michelle talks a lot, always has, but when it comes to results, I haven't seen much. It wasn't loud, it wasn't shouted, it wasn't dramatic in delivery. But those words hit the room like a dropped glass. The audience froze. Some blanked, unsure they heard correctly. Others stared at the stage, stunned by how boldly the line had been crossed. Even the young woman who asked the question stepped back slightly from the microphone, her face stiffening as if the remark had landed directly on her shoulders. Then came the reaction, a gasp, sharp and unified, as if the entire hall inhaled at once. The kind of sound people make when they witness something they know immediately is wrong. The moderator shifted uncomfortably. He tried to rescue the moment, his voice cracking slightly as he reminded the panel and audience that Michelle's initiative had partnered with more than 100 schools nationwide. He listed accomplishments, statistics, partnerships, anything to bring balance back to the conversation. But Trump wasn't interested. He waved off the correction, lifted the microphone again, and repeated Michelle's name with a dismissive shrug. "Michelle Obama," he said, letting her name echo briefly before adding, "We need winners." The final words hung heavily in the air, heavier than anything said that entire night. The tension was so thick, the camera seemed to hesitate, zooming in slightly as though trying to capture the shift happening inside the room. And then, silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of shock. The silence that arrives when people witness a moment that feels wrong on a deeper level. A silence that demanded someone, anyone, step in. But no one did. The cameras kept rolling, the microphones kept recording, and within minutes, the moment was online. Clips spread from Twitter to Instagram to news blogs. Headlines popped up at lightning speed. Trump attacks Michelle Obama live at town hall. Audience gasps as Trump takes unexpected jab. shock and outrage after Michelle Obama remark. By the time the broadcast ended, the clip had already climbed into national trending lists. News anchors interrupted their scheduled topics to discuss it. Commentators debated the meaning behind it. Late-night hosts wrote last-minute monologues that would air before midnight. But while the internet buzzed, one house in Chicago remained quiet. Inside their living room, lit softly by a warm lamp, Barack and Michelle Obama watched the clip like the rest of the country. The sound played back, Trump's words repeating through the speakers. Michelle folded her arms, calm but clearly disappointed. Barack leaned back into the couch, expression steady, jaw relaxed. "He really can't help himself, can he?" Michelle said softly. Barack didn't answer immediately. He watched the screen a moment longer, absorbing not the insult, but the reaction, the gasp, the discomfort, the shift. Finally, he inhaled and said, "Let's see how far words travel when they come from emptiness." He wasn't angry, he wasn't shaken, he wasn't planning a counterattack. He understood something instinctively. Sometimes the loudest response is silence. And so, the Obamas chose not to respond, not that night, not the next morning, not even 48 hours later. While the world demanded a statement, they said nothing. A silence that felt deliberate. A silence that unsettled the people who expected outrage. A silence that stirred the country more than any loud response ever could. Because while insults make noise, grace makes impact. And that impact was only beginning. The morning after the Atlanta town hall felt different across the nation. Even before the sun had fully risen, conversations were already buzzing. News tickers flashed the clip repeatedly. Talk shows opened their broadcasts with the same 7-second segment, Trump leaning back, smirking, and delivering the line that made the room gasp. But something unexpected happened. Instead of immediate counterattacks, fiery interviews, or carefully prepared statements from the Obamas, the country was met with complete silence. No press release, no interview, no tweet, no spokesperson stepping forward to comment. Just silence. And almost immediately, that silence started to feel powerful, even strategic. At first, reporters assumed the Obamas simply wanted time to process the moment. But as hours passed, the silence began to take on a life of its own. Analysts on every network tried to interpret it like it was a coded message. Are they refusing to dignify the insult? Are they waiting to respond at the right moment? Is this intentional restraint? What does this silence mean? Suddenly, the silence became the story. Meanwhile, online reactions exploded. Within 24 hours, hashtags flooded Twitter and Instagram. Hashtags stand with Michelle, respect Michelle Obama, words matter, leadership is character. Posts poured in from parents, teachers, community organizers, college students, celebrities, people from every background, every state, every political leaning. The reaction wasn't solely about politics. It was about respect, about tone, about dignity. Even people who normally disagreed with Michelle Obama found themselves defending her. They weren't reacting to policy. They were reacting to the way the audience had gasped, the shock that had filled the room when that single line crossed the boundary between political critique and personal insult. But back in Chicago, the Obamas remained quiet. They went about their day normally. Michelle attended a scheduled meeting with a team working on her initiative. Barack prepared for his upcoming keynote at the Chicago Youth Leadership Summit. Their silence wasn't avoidance. It was intention. And intention always sends a message. Because sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect is refusing to acknowledge it. By the second day, the silence had become so striking that even the most seasoned journalists were stunned. News networks dedicated full segments to discussing why the Obamas were choosing not to respond. Analysts debated whether restraint had become a lost art in American public life. For the first time in a long time, silence, not shouting, was leading the conversation. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was not silent. He fired off a series of tweets mocking the situation, jabbing at the Obama's lack of response, suggesting that they were scared, weak, or caught off guard. His tone was celebratory, confident, convinced he had scored some sort of rhetorical victory. But his tweets didn't have the effect he expected. Instead of amplifying his message, they sharpened the contrast between his noise and the Obama silence. Commentators noticed. Viewers noticed. Even some of his supporters noticed. The more he tweeted, the more glaring the difference became. It was like watching two completely different approaches to leadership in real time. One fueled by volume, the other fueled by composure. And for a country tired of shouting, the difference was jarring. By the third day, something even more unexpected happened. Michelle Obama's favorability rating began to rise, noticeably. Polls showed a spike across multiple demographics: young adults, suburban voters, educators, and even some conservative groups. Donations to her initiative tripled. Her recent podcast episodes and speeches shot back into the trending charts. Sales for her memoir saw a sudden boost. All triggered by silence. Not because she had defended herself, not because she had clapped back, not because she had explained anything, but because millions of people were reminded of something they felt had been missing: dignity, restraint, maturity, qualities that don't trend easily but resonate deeply. The more the silence continued, the more people began to reflect on leadership, on influence, on what it means to respond with grace, on how powerful self-control can be in moments of tension. And somewhere inside all this national reflection, the upcoming Chicago Youth Leadership Summit began transforming from a local community event into something else entirely. Originally, it was meant to be a gathering of young leaders from around the city, students who were passionate about the future of their communities. But as the silence stretched on, anticipation began building. Cameras multiplied, reporters applied for credentials, influential figures RSVP'd. Millions planned to watch the live stream. Everyone expected Barack Obama's keynote to address the moment. The country was waiting. By the fourth day, political commentators were calling the upcoming speech the most anticipated address of the year. They knew exactly what viewers wanted: a measured, powerful response. Not an insult, not a counterattack. Something different. Something only Barack Obama could deliver. The Obamas, still silent, said nothing about the upcoming speech. But behind the scenes, Barack fine-tuned his words carefully. He wasn't writing a rebuttal. He wasn't writing a defense. He wasn't even writing a clapback. He was writing something bigger. Something that wasn't about Trump. Something that wasn't about the insult. Something that wasn't about anger. Something about leadership. The kind that transcends the moment. The morning of the summit, Chicago's air was electric. Thousands of students lined up to enter the arena, buzzing with excitement, not entirely aware of how monumental the moment they were about to witness would become. Outside, news vans filled the streets. Journalists rehearsed lines into microphones. Cameras rotated on their tripods, scanning the crowd. For the first time in days, the Obama's silence was about to break. Inside the arena, the atmosphere was charged, hopeful, tense, reverent. People didn't just want Barack Obama's response. They needed it. They needed clarity. They needed reassurance. They needed a model of leadership that lifted, not dragged down. And as the lights dimmed and Barack Obama walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause that seemed to carry the weight of the entire week. He smiled, a calm, grounded smile. He waited for the applause to settle. His presence alone shifted the air in the room. What he said next would rewrite the narrative completely. It wouldn't be angry. It wouldn't be defensive. It wouldn't even mention Trump's name. It would do something far more powerful. It would change the entire conversation. When Barack Obama's final words at the Youth Leadership Summit echoed through the arena, the reaction spread far beyond the walls of that building. Clips of the speech erupted across the internet, carried by millions who felt something shift inside them. Commentators called it the comeback without confrontation. Others described it as a masterclass in leadership. But inside the Obama household, the mood was steady, unshaken, almost serene. Barack's response had done something unusual. It diffused the chaos without feeding it. It addressed the tone of the moment without dragging anyone into the mud. But while people were celebrating his words, millions were quietly waiting for something else. The moment Michelle Obama would speak. If Barack represented reason, Michelle represented resonance. Her voice didn't just explain things, it moved people. She didn't need a microphone or a stage to shift the mood of a conversation. Her presence alone could tilt an entire narrative. And after days of silence, America was waiting to see how she would respond, if she would respond at all. But Michelle didn't rush. She didn't jump into interviews. She didn't tweet cryptic messages. She didn't release a statement through her team. Instead, she continued her work, quietly meeting with the young women involved in her education initiative, checking in on local programs, and spending time with students who had no idea they were becoming part of a national conversation. To Michelle, the work itself had always been more important than the headlines surrounding it. And that was exactly why the headlines kept following her. The pressure intensified as the week unfolded. Media vans stationed outside the community center where she worked. Journalists asked for comments every time she stepped outside. Cameramen tracked her car. But Michelle remained steady, smiling politely, waving gently, saying nothing that could feed the fire. Each day she stayed silent, the country seemed to lean in a little closer. Then, 4 days after Barack's speech, the moment finally arrived. Quietly, naturally, without any anticipation or press buildup. Michelle Obama was scheduled to speak at a small community event in Chicago, the kind she attended dozens of times a year. Not a major conference, not a televised rally, just a simple gathering hosted by a local nonprofit that had partnered with her initiative. But when Michelle stepped into the room, something was immediately different. The crowd that usually filled these events had doubled. Cameras that weren't normally present lined the back. News outlets that had ignored smaller community functions for years suddenly considered this one breaking news. Reporters scribbled notes the moment she walked in. Everyone knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. Michelle began the event like she always did. She greeted the young women in the audience, shook hands with the volunteers, and thanked the families who came. Her tone was warm and grounded. Anyone watching from a distance might have believed she was simply there to encourage students and celebrate community achievements. But beneath the warm smile, everyone could sense it. She was building towards something. When she finally stepped up to the podium, the room fell into a hush unlike anything the small venue had ever held. The cameras focused sharply. Even the students, who usually shifted in their seats or whispered among themselves, sat frozen, wide-eyed. Michelle looked out at them, not with anger, but with a calm steadiness that felt stronger than outrage. Over the past few days, she began gently, a lot of noise has been made about leadership, about tone, about how people choose to use their voices. The room held its breath. She paused for a moment, not a dramatic pause, but one that felt intentional, like she wanted her audience to settle into the truth she was about to deliver. "I want to tell you something," she continued, her voice soft but unmistakably powerful. "Every time someone tries to make you smaller, it's because they can't handle how big your purpose is." The crowd broke. Applause thundered through the room. Students stood up. Volunteers clapped through tears. Reporters scrambled to capture every second. It was the first time Michelle had addressed the national moment, and she hadn't mentioned a name, a quote, or an insult. Her words were not about Trump. Her words were not about retaliation. Her words were not about politics. Her words were about power, the kind that comes from knowing who you are. When the applause finally settled, Michelle continued, her tone steady, controlled, deliberate. There will always be people who think that tearing others down makes them stronger. But strength isn't measured by the volume of your voice. Strength is measured by the lives you lift up. Students nodded. Some wiped tears. Adults found themselves reflecting on the moments in their own lives when someone tried to belittle them. Michelle wasn't just speaking to the room. She was speaking to the millions who would see her words online before the day ended. Her voice softened again as she added, "The world will tell you to fight fire with fire, but I want you to remember something. You don't rise by sinking to anyone's level. You rise by knowing your worth and walking in it." It was subtle, but undeniable. The response the world had been waiting for had finally arrived. And it wasn't angry. And it wasn't sarcastic. And it wasn't revenge. It was dignity. The kind of dignity that only becomes more powerful when pressed. The kind of dignity that millions had admired about Michelle Obama long before this moment ever arrived. The kind of dignity that transforms an insult into a lesson. As she stepped away from the podium, the applause returned. Louder, deeper, sustained. But Michelle didn't bask in it. She simply smiled, placed a hand over her heart, and nodded respectfully to the crowd. She didn't need to say more. She didn't need to clarify anything. She didn't need to address the insult directly. Her message had landed exactly where it needed to land. Within an hour, clips of the speech flooded social media. Her quote, "Every time someone tries to make you smaller," became the most shared line of the week. Teachers printed it on posters, parents texted it to their children, community leaders shared it at meetings. Michelle's message didn't cancel the insult, it eclipsed it. Because sometimes the most powerful clapback is the one that never mentions the person who threw the first blow. And with that, Michelle Obama had done something extraordinary. She transformed a moment of disrespect into a movement of empowerment. But the story wasn't finished. The nation still had to confront what came next, the backlash, the political fallout, and the unexpected shift in public sentiment that would follow. Michelle Obama's community center speech didn't just trend, it detonated across the internet. Within an hour, the clip was everywhere. Within 3 hours, it was the most watched moment online. By evening, her words had already been printed on posters, used in school announcements, shared in board meetings, turned into motivational graphics, and added to thousands of TikTok edits. And yet, the power of that moment wasn't in its virality. It was in the contrast. In a single week, America had witnessed two completely opposite approaches to influence. One voice using insult to make noise. Another using dignity to inspire strength. The country felt the difference. And now, the aftermath began. Across newsrooms, editors tossed aside planned scripts and rewrote entire broadcasts. Headlines shifted from outrage to admiration. Michelle Obama responds with grace. A masterclass in leadership. The viral moment that silenced a week of chaos. The clapback without the clap. Commentators who had spent years covering heated political battles admitted openly that they were stunned. Not because Michelle had responded, but because of how she responded. Her restraint, her precision, her refusal to name names, it all amplified her message even more. It made the moment feel larger than politics. It made it feel human. Political analysts noted a pattern emerging. Every time Trump fired off a new tweet, Michelle's quote gained another wave of traction. Every time he mocked the silence, Barack's speech went more viral. Every time he tried to steer attention back toward himself, the narrative doubled down on the Obama's composure. It became clear, the more noise he made, the more their silence spoke. And that subtle shift began shaping public opinion in real time. Polls started charting unexpected movement. Approval ratings for the former first couple rose noticeably. Michelle's initiatives saw a record spike in support. Meanwhile, public reaction to Trump's comment leaned heavily negative, even among some who typically supported him. It wasn't about politics anymore. It was about tone, about the unspoken rules of respect. Inside conservative talk shows, even the hosts who typically supported Trump chose their words carefully. Some distanced themselves from the comment. Others said they wished the exchange had gone differently. And while some defended the remark outright, they found themselves drowned out by a larger wave of discomfort. Because no matter how divided the nation was, insulting Michelle Obama, a figure widely respected beyond politics, felt like an unnecessary blow. But while the media dissected the moment from every angle, something else was quietly happening behind the scenes. Teachers across the country used Michelle's quote as the starting point for classroom discussions. Guidance counselors placed the line on bulletin boards. Churches referenced it in sermons. Youth mentors used it to encourage teenage girls. Parents used it to comfort their daughters after a hard day at school. What had begun as an insult became a national teaching moment about resilience. And the Obamas still never said Trump's name. This restraint ignited a new conversation across the country, one about the power of silence, the importance of tone, and what Americans wanted leadership to feel like again. Some described the week as a return to moral clarity. Others called it a reminder of what maturity in public life used to sound like. Many felt as though the moment revealed something deeper, not just about the Obamas, but about themselves. The more Americans talked, the clearer it became. The country was exhausted by shouting, exhausted by insults, exhausted by chaos. And in that exhaustion, the Obamas' approach shined even brighter. Michelle didn't just uplift her audience. She uplifted a country that had forgotten what calm confidence looked like. But not everyone celebrated the moment. Behind closed doors, Trump's team scrambled. Advisors rushed into late-night meetings. Pollsters warned of rapidly shifting public sentiment. Communications directors drafted messages, deleted them, rewrote them, and deleted them again. No matter what they tried, the narrative stayed locked on one reality. Michelle Obama's response, and Barack's before it, had completely outshined the original moment. And now, Trump's camp had a problem. Every attempt to recenter the conversation only pushed the nation further toward the Obama side. Every defensive tweet reminded people of the original insult. Every attack seemed smaller compared to the grace on the other side. For the first time in a long time, Trump's words didn't control the story. The Obama silence did. And then came the unexpected twist, the moment that sealed the shift permanently. At a town hall in Colorado, a woman in the audience asked Trump whether he regretted his comment about Michelle Obama. The room fell quiet, waiting for him to strike back or double down. But something was different. Trump paused. For the first time in days, he hesitated before speaking. He didn't backtrack or apologize, but he didn't repeat the insult either. He turned the question sideways, changing the subject, pivoting toward policy. It was subtle, but viewers noticed. The fire behind the moment had gone out. The narrative had moved on, because Michelle's message had replaced it. By the end of the week, analysts weren't talking about the insult at all. They were talking about the leadership on display, the restraint, the dignity, the example set in front of millions of young people. Barack Obama summarized the change best during a later speech, months after the moment had faded from the news cycle. Standing before a crowd of college graduates, he said, "You can't control what people say about you, but you can control how you answer. Sometimes that answer is silence. Sometimes it's grace. And sometimes it's deciding that someone else's noise doesn't deserve to guide your direction." The audience erupted because they remembered. They remembered the gasp in Atlanta. They remembered the silence that followed. They remembered the moment Michelle stepped up and redefined the conversation. They remembered how the country felt, calm, lifted, encouraged, even in the middle of chaos. That's why the moment stayed with people. It wasn't the insult. It wasn't the politics. It wasn't even the backlash. It was the reminder that leadership isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how wisely you respond. Michelle Obama's words didn't just close the week. They opened a conversation about character that the country didn't know it needed. A conversation that will echo long after the headlines fade. And in the end, the nation didn't remember the attack. It remembered the answer, or rather, the answer that refused to become an attack.